Hello and welcome to the Phil Hay Show that's brought to you by The Athletic and The Square Ball. We are on Twitter at The Phil Hay Show. I'm Dan Moylan. With me from The Square Ball is Michael Normanton.
Hello.
And from The Athletic, Phil Hay.
Hello.
Fresh off your event at Leeds Town Hall last night for the book launch. How was it?
Very good it was, yeah. Good turnout, about 700 people there. Excellent. Didn't see you there, Daniel. There was an empty seat at the back.
No, somebody had to stay at home and write this show. And yes, we do write it, by the way.
Well, sometimes. Sometimes, yeah.
Is it bigger and better things now? Wembley Arena, something like that next time?
No, it's nice to be back here. I like this cosy podcast studio.
If you want to subscribe to The Athletic and read all Phil's articles about Leeds United, Premier League's on there and a whole host of other sports. 33% off is the offer doing the rounds at the minute, off the full price of a sub at theathletic.com/Leeds pod. Tell me about a good article that's going to be on there this week, Phil Hay.
Well, if you haven't read it, there's an article at the moment which published on Monday, which is a former Leeds United player who is now in the Royal Marines Commandos, as you do. Interesting story about his career path and everything else. We had to anonymise it because of MOD legal restrictions. So something a little bit different if you fancy getting into that.
And you can also use it as a game of like mystery sportsman as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's like question of sport.
And it's really difficult to find out who it is, I have to say. I mean, I couldn't just Google the list of clubs on his CV and find out exactly who that was very, very quickly. But, you know, Official Secrets Act and all that.
Well done you. Were you going to prison?
Didn't say his name, did I? Didn't say his name. Theathletic.com/Leeds pod if you want to read that. And the football, and it's been an international week. So no Leeds United, but plenty going on with our players because we've got lots of international players now. Some actually allowed to travel, some not. Where should we start with this one then?
You have to take an interest in international breaks these days, don't you? It's not that Leeds have never had international players, it's just that they never had too many who were high profile when they were down in the Championship and certainly not in League One. And it was basically 2 weeks off for most people. But we should probably start with Bamford against Andorra, given that his England debut came round at last. And it's just unfortunate that you wait for so many years to get your chance and it turns out to be a game like that. I looked at the lineup and I kind of feared right from the start that it wasn't going to be a particularly joined up performance. It was a really unfamiliar lineup. Things like Alexander-Arnold in midfield, not structured in the way that you'd expect a typical Southgate England team to be structured. And when the game got going, I felt sorry for him. I was like a lot of other people who felt that his movement and his runs were pretty good. Thought he was putting himself in the right areas. There wasn't an awful lot coming from behind him. Nothing much in the way of just kind of simple and easy passes, looking for the obvious ball. It felt a little bit to me like there were a lot of players on the pitch who were desperately trying to impress and desperately trying to look good. And I know he would have wanted to impress as well. But I did think, despite the total lack of chances and the absence of any goals, he was kind of doing the right things. The problem was always going to be that when you come out the back end of a game against Andorra, people expect you to have scored.
There was no space to score, though, was there? And
no.
His new friends weren't passing the ball to him.
No, and I think with Bamford, Southgate has to commit to giving him a reasonable run of games. I mean, if his international career is going to consist of games against Andorra with a pretty unfamiliar team where they pack everybody behind the ball, then it's never going to go anywhere. He needs to be able to stretch himself a bit more than that, and he needs to settle in properly. I didn't think it was a bad start. I didn't think it was a terrible start. It was just one of those games that for people who like to question whether Bamford's good enough, whether Phillips is good enough, it was kind of easy ammo, really.
But Phillips has come on leaps and bounds. It's almost a year to the day since he made his England debut, and that was a fairly inauspicious start when he pulled on the shirt for the first time, and it was that friendly against Denmark away, wasn't it? Whereas now, he's absolutely... Well, it's crucial. He's the cornerstone of that side. I mean, I know you had your event last night, but he was running midfield against Poland. He looked brilliant.
He's going to be a fixture in this team, certainly for as long as Southgate is coach, and potentially longer term as well. It will depend on whoever succeeds Southgate eventually, what they do with the system and the tactics, and whether or not there's space in that for Phillips to play. But I was thinking last night about something Bielsa said a little while back when he was asked about Crescencio Somerville at Leeds and why it was that he'd come through and was a bit closer to the first team now, and how it was that Bielsa judged how good players were and how much potential they had. And he said, aside from the sort of raw ability and what you see when they train and when they play for the under-23s, Bielsa pays a lot of attention to what the other players think of these guys, and particularly the senior players, and he reads a lot from how the senior players react to the younger players who come through. He can see the difference between the under-23s that automatically slot in and look good, and the under-23s that the first teamers aren't so sure about. And I think with Phillips in England, you can see that the other England players, and particularly those who play regularly, have taken to him really quickly as an international player. There doesn't seem to be any doubt in their minds about the fact that he is good enough and deserves to be in that team. And a year on, he's looking as if he's been in the side for years, and he is at this rate going to amass an awful lot of caps. I think it's been a very sort of obvious strand of his development, but the fact that he is so established now in that lineup, I think tells you not only that Southgate rates him, but that the players around him do too.
It's not often something we think about, that is it? Acceptance within a group, but we've all operated in circles of friends or colleagues or whatever it might be, and I guess it's true, isn't it? Your face needs to fit.
Your face needs to fit, but your ability needs to fit as well, and that's always been the case at Leeds and at other clubs. When your under-23s start to move through and start to graduate, it's easier for the first teamers to accommodate and to make the effort with the players who are quite obviously good enough. It doesn't mean that they're unkind or unhelpful to those that aren't, but if you can sense straight away that a player's a little bit below the standard of what you need, it doesn't feel like a good fit. It doesn't feel comfortable having them around. I think that's what Bielsa was getting at, really. When you see an under-23 who looks like he fits in nicely with the first team players, you know that that's somebody that you should be supporting. You know it's somebody that you should be giving as much attention to as you possibly can. And as I say, I've noticed that quite distinctly with Phillips, that people around him like Declan Rice and Harry Kane and others, you don't see anything in their body language which is frustration about the way he's playing or what he's doing or the speed he's thinking or the speed he's passing at, and it is crucial that if you go into a squad where people aren't sure about you, then it does create that uncertainty. If you go into a squad where people think straight away that you're good for them, then it is 100 times easier.
I will say this of Phillips, that he seems to receive and then release the ball dead quickly. That speed of thought is really there, because one of the frustrations with someone like Raheem Sterling that you see is that he hangs on to it for far too long sometimes. Sometimes it's brilliant, but a lot of the time you find yourself getting frustrated with him, don't you? Whereas Phillips gets it, pops it off, is moving again, and his movement is fantastic in that midfield. I've come to really appreciate how he always seeks out space around midfield to allow other people to move in.
He's very unique in the way he plays. There aren't really any other players there are similar players in England, players who are similar in position and kind of outlook, but very few who do the full range and the full package in the way that he does. I mean, he and Sterling are obviously very different players, and it seems to me far more essential in Phillips' position that you can pass quickly and see the next ball than it is in Sterling's. But Phillips has spoken before about how much attention he paid to Hernandez when Hernandez was at Leeds, and the thing that he loved about Hernandez was his ability to create and to see opportunities and openings in front of him, but also the way that Hernandez seemed to understand before the ball came to him what he should be doing with it next. It was that thing of trying to be one or two passes ahead of where you actually are and being able to read the game and how it's going to go. And I feel like that's coming through with Phillips again, and he just seems to be improving constantly. And you're now starting to think of him in the bracket of a player whose value must be creeping up somewhere close towards 100 million now.
It's a lot of money. And he got booked ridiculously after 7 minutes, so he did well to see out the remaining 83, in a very disciplined manner. Did you see that booking?
I've not actually seen it yet, right. I've got to be honest.
He's basically gone in and scooped the ball out, so his studs are up, but his foot is the right way up, as it should be, with the studs to the floor. Gone in, scooped the ball out, and as he's turned to get out of there, he's planted his foot, and it happens to have gone on the Polish player's foot, who's placed his foot underneath Phillips, and he got booked for it. It was the most ridiculous booking I think I've ever seen. Well,
the one thing Phillips is good at, though, is actually moderating himself when he is on a yellow card. If you look through his record, it's not really a litany of yellow cards converting into red cards. He has the occasional rush of blood, like, for example,
Forest QPR.
Yeah, where he's kind of diving in, and he knows with hindsight that he shouldn't. But when I did that piece with him after promotion, we were talking about the QPR red card. And he said to me, I knew straight away that it was a red. He said, I was doing that thing where you try to sort of not look at the referee and you sort of walk away as if it's no big deal. But I knew he was going to send me off. And he said sorry to the players in the dressing room afterwards. But he also said, I'm not being funny, I would do that again. If the ball was there, I would go for it again, because that's kind of how I am. I didn't see it. I didn't watch the game last night, but it did put him in a difficult position. And again, just sensible to get through it.
I feel like for England, people have almost been waiting for him to get sent off as well. Ever since his debut, he's got a little bit of a reputation, I think, for being a bit of a hothead who does fly into these tackles. So my concern was that he'd do it in the Euros. I think it was always will Phillips get sent off in a quarter-final or a semi-final and become a national hate figure, and we're going to have to just bring him back to Leeds and keep him safe for a while. But I feel like, barring a few idiots on the internet, the majority of people have come around to the idea that he is definitely good enough to be in that side.
Yeah, if you search his name now on a match day, there's people saying, Calvin Phillips is our best player so far. So it's really swung across that last year. It's almost like it takes time to bed into a team, isn't it?
I don't think he is a hothead at all. I think he likes a tackle. And I think Leeds actually need that in this lineup. They do need a little bit of an enforcer who can put it about a bit and who can dish it out to Ashley Barnes when Ashley Barnes is asking for it. But I wrote a piece this morning on, we've been looking at debuts at different clubs, and we're going to come on to that in part 2. I wrote about his debut at Moylan against Wolves back in 2015, and the day wasn't really solely about him. It was, from everybody's perspective, it was more about him, Mowat, Cook was missing, him, Mowat, Charlie Taylor, Byram, this young core of academy players who were kind of like the antidote to the poison that was going around Leeds, and the total lack of progress that was being made under Cellino. They were a bit of a shining light. So I went and I watched the game back just to see what he'd been like, and it was very interesting because you could see in him, he was playing further forward than he does under Bielsa, but you could see in him the effort to move into space and to pass the ball quickly. And you could also see 2 really big hits on Jack Price and Kevin McDonald, which he just went through them, left McDonald in a heap, got up, shrugged his shoulders and walked off. And you thought, well, that's him kind of set for the next 10, 15 years. But he, as I say, I don't think... we'll probably get onto Berardi in part 2, I would think. And Berardi you can put in the hothead category by his own admission. I don't think Phillips falls into that. I just think every now and again he gets it wrong, and because of the way he does tackle, when he does get it wrong, sometimes there are going to be consequences.
Phillips has got a bit more of the batty about him in that he just routinely will, like say, put a big hit in on someone and then just shrug his shoulders, turn away, and occasionally things are kind of kicking off a little bit behind him, and he tends to actually stay out of it, having done it in the first place. He just does a bit of balls there, I've got it. What's the problem?
Just wrapping up the other internationals who've been away from Thorpe Arch then. Do we know anything about Stuart Dallas? I mean, he left the Northern Ireland camp for personal reasons, and we obviously don't necessarily need to know what those personal reasons are, but is everything all right?
Well, I must be honest, I haven't asked specific... Well, at least I've asked about him, but I didn't, again, want to ask specifically what the personal reasons were, because there are occasions where you need to find out about these things. There are occasions where you know that it is the sort of thing that should be left private and should be for him to deal with. We'll see Bielsa tomorrow before the Liverpool game. There are a lot of people to ask about, actually. They're obviously Cleek and Firpo, how they've recovered from COVID. There are the players coming back from international duty. But there will obviously be Dallas as well. I don't think Bielsa will go into any detail at all about what's been going on with him, but it should become clearer as to whether or not he's going to be available for the Liverpool game.
And just on the Northern Ireland front, Bailey Peacock Farrell saving penalties for fun these days.
Yes. Funnily enough, the girl Nancy at our place, who used to cover Sheffield Wednesday, is now a bit more of a kind of across the Football League writer's job for us. She got in touch about Peacock Farrell earlier this week because he is actually having a decent run at Sheffield Wednesday, which he definitely needs. I mean, I was looking at his stats, and he's only played twice as many club games as he has international games for Northern Ireland. I think he's on about 25 caps already. But if you look at his club career, he's only started like 49 league games. It's a really weird scenario. And I understood why Leeds sold him and took the money when they let him go to Burnley, and obviously signed Meslier, who looked like a better prospect. But the Burnley move did seem like a weird one to me. I didn't see the circumstances in which he was ever likely to get much of a game there. And he has needed a fresh start, and presumably Sheffield Wednesday will be a decent enough move for him. But yeah, he seems to have become a bit of a penalty specialist.
On the Wales front, Dan James and Tyler Roberts both doing turns at different times across the window. Have you caught much of that? Dan James has actually been a bit of a threat. He's looked useful.
He's played a lot as well, so he'll come back with quite a few minutes in his legs. I mean, he's going to be the fascinating decision this weekend, particularly, and we'll talk a bit about Rafinha in Brazil and the absolute mess that's become, but particularly if Rafinha isn't available, James should be match fit. Whether he's Bielsa match fit is another question. And as we speak at the moment, he won't have trained at all at Thorpe Arch because he was on the plane to Finland within a couple of hours of completing his transfer to Leeds last week. So you know what Bielsa's like. It tends to be the case that he holds back on these things and he wants players to be fully up to speed with his ideas and his system and everything else. But James has played enough this season and played enough in the past week or so to have the sort of level of fitness that would let him get involved.
Well, just to timestamp this, we're recording this section at 11:30 on Thursday morning. I've got every confidence that he's doing laps at Thorpe Arch at the minute on that running track. He's arrived. Off you go then.
I always say this, but that's my abiding memory of Augustine was rolling up at Thorpe Arch on the Monday after he'd signed, to find him just running around on his own. The sort of circumstances that somebody who Bielsa would talk about as, as you used to say, at his peak, Augustine would be a £40 million striker, and he's out in the cold alone, running around this weird running track.
And Tyler Roberts had a glaring chance for Wales last night. I have to admit to have not seen this. I've only seen the social media reaction. But if you put his name into Twitter on Wednesday night, not necessarily one you'd want to share for the highlights reel, I don't think.
It was not a great finish. It has to be said. I mean, we saw Costa go last week to Valencia, and I think there'd been a kind of, without it being savage, I think there'd been a general loss of patience with Costa. I think I got the sense that the fan base generally had reached the view that it was never quite going to happen, and certainly reached the view that he wasn't contributing enough, which I think is very difficult to argue with. Roberts is kind of next in line as the player who really needs to start clicking properly. It's not that he never makes an impact, because he can and he does. It's just that he never gets on a roll, and never gets on a roll for a concerted period of time. And once you start to think of yourself as an established Premier League team, and once you start to think about moving up the table and competing for bigger things than just league position, potentially in future competing for Europe and so on, you need players to be at a very, very high level. And he does need to have a good season, I feel, this year.
And World Cups every 2 years, just to wrap up the international aspect on things. That's a terrible idea, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, surely that's not going to happen. I mean, it probably will happen, won't it? Because once
things always happen.
Yeah, and in football, once people get big commercial ideas in their heads, particularly organisations like FIFA, they just get the claws into it and they stick with it. It just seems laughable that there's this conversation going on about extra World Cups every 2 years, when at the moment FIFA and clubs in England can't even agree on getting players over to Brazil for international matches. It's a kind of major mess, I feel, international football at the moment. And you have Infantino, who it keeps saying there are too many meaningless matches and international matches. I think there are just too many matches, too many games. I mean, that's one of the things that Bielsa always talks about. He tries hard not to get too political about this and not to get too involved. But the crux of what he says when he's asked about this is always, players are asked to play too much. There's too much load put on them. There's too much expected of them, and the schedule is too full. And it's hard to see, unless anybody is thinking of being in the Euros or the Copa America or whatever else, it's hard to see how a World Cup every 2 years is going to do anything other than just increase the strain on the players who play most anyway.
Make every alternate one amateur.
That'd be a great idea.
Do it on a raffle. Do it on a raffle.
Non-league. Yeah.
Not even as good as that. Just let anyone under the age of 50 can buy a ticket. You never know. You might be turning out for England.
This sounds like a football cliches podcast idea. Yeah, I'd be all for that.
The dream still exists, then, doesn't it, for a shot at a World Cup? But I'm most surprised by Arsene Wenger in this, because he's the one who's at the forefront of pushing this forward. And you can't imagine him, the Arsenal version of Arsene Wenger, ever going for something like this. For all the reasons you've just said, it just feels, I don't know, it just all feels wrong.
But when people talk about Wenger at the beginning with Arsenal, they always talk about how he completely changed not only the way that Arsenal thought about football and prepared for football, so diet and nutrition and fitness work and everything else, but little by little changed a lot of the rest of the English game as well. Perceptions of what you had to be like to be a professional footballer, how you had to look after yourself, changed in no small way because of Wenger's ideas and Wenger's influence. So he clearly thinks about and understands a lot when it comes to the maintenance of players' bodies and mental health as well, but particularly physical health. And I don't know, perhaps there's a bigger grand plan to this, but it just seems to me like you'll be shoehorning in even more games for players who really don't need them.
And it would mean completely tearing up the football calendar again, wouldn't it? Like you say, where do the Euros fit? I don't understand. When do you do the qualifiers? Do the Euros exist alongside the extra World Cup? I just don't get it.
Well, also, if, on the basis of what's happening with Brazil at the moment and the Brazilian call-ups, there is no way that UEFA are going to bend on wanting the Euros to continue as they are. And if FIFA moved to 2 World Cups every 2 years, do UEFA decide that actually the Euros every 2 years would be great? In the same way, I don't see the people who organise the Copa America saying, yeah, just get rid of our tournament, that's fine. Like last season when they shoehorned about 8 rounds of the League Cup into 3 weeks, rather than saying, oh, there's a global pandemic and the calendar's an absolute mess, why don't we maybe just shelve the League Cup for a season or find a different way of doing it? No, it absolutely has to be played like every other tournament, so we'll ram it into a ridiculously short period of time to make sure that we don't lose our vested interest. And you do kind of find that it's a little bit like, reminds you a little bit of like tax rises or home building. Everybody agrees that it would be a good thing and it should happen, just provided that those homes are getting built nowhere near you and that you don't actually have to pay any of the extra tax. If those two caveats are met, then yeah, absolutely fine.
You do get the feeling with this, it's just FIFA seeing the money they earn from a World Cup and going, we could double that. Just do that again and keep doing it, and then maybe we'll move them to every 6 months.
There surely will be enough opposition to see this off, but don't hold your breath at the same time.
So let's talk debuts then. Dan James potentially should make his debut against Liverpool at the weekend. There's a big thing on.
Should seems like a very bold word to use. Might, yes.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We will see on that front. There's a big thing about debuts on The Athletic this week, and immediately, as soon as you mentioned let's do debuts on this, I went, Berardi. We have to talk about Berardi, which surely it's the high watermark for debuts, getting sent off and nearly killing a man.
Yeah, that kung fu kick. Yeah. I always remember that night more for the fan who tried to tell Eddie that Leeds had found the next Tony Yeboah after Dukara scored twice. I think it was the same game, and my mistake if it wasn't. But yeah, that kung fu kick to get himself sent off was absolutely tremendous. And the thing about Berardi was that he actually went on to be a really useful asset at Leeds and a good player under Bielsa. And unlike a lot of players who have a kind of bad start but then settle into it, you really did in the first few weeks with him think, is this guy just an absolute lunatic? Is this guy going to be on a run of red cards forever? And he kind of was to an extent. They always kind of surfaced. But you really, it was very hard to learn too much from that game because of the opposition and because of the type of game it was. But you just sort of looked at him getting sent off in the fashion that he did and thought to yourself, for as long as he stays here, this could actually be a lot of fun, a lot of grief for the managers who are trying to coach him.
Before we go any further, I should give a massive credit to LUFC Data for the page on debuts, which was really, really helpful when it came to digging up information about this. So do have a look at lufcdata.com. And
there was a definite sense of cut and paste in here, I thought, when I looked at the notes. No cutting and pasting,
actually. It's just brought back memories that I think were somewhere. For example, I'd forgotten that Giuseppe Berluschi had been sent off on his debut as well, because I was trying to find red cards on debuts, because that's essentially the worst circumstance. Yeah,
it was kind of different for Belushi because at the point where he was sent off, that performance against Watford was dropping to bits rapidly and was starting to go up in smoke. As I recall with Berardi, I'm pretty sure the game was one and done when he did his Bruce Lee impression, which, to be honest, added to the spectacle on the evening. But yeah, it started, as the saying goes, started badly for Belushi and went downhill from there.
It's probably a mark of how the League Cup games were treated at Leeds at the time, but I'd actually moved my seat for this one. I thought I'll go in the East Stand so I can sit down because I'm sort of getting a bit old. I thought, I'm not really that bothered about this, but I'm going to go. So I ended up right in front of it, and I was sat with Moscow occasionally of this podcast. And he did it, and we kind of looked at each other and we're like, have we both seen that right? He did just kick him in the chest, didn't he? Yeah. And we were like, I think so, yeah. Oh, he's been sent off, yeah.
Okay. It was echoes of Cantona at Palace diving into the crowd where you had to do a double take and go, has that just happened?
Yeah. And also, how physically did you end up in that position? It's a kind of bizarre, weird way to try and
how mentally did you end up in that position?
Well, yeah.
I've never got that right. I mean, like playing five-a-side down at your local centre or whatever, and it can get a little bit tasty, and you might kick one another or kick people that you don't know, but never in all the years of doing that did I witness any kung fu kicks to the chest or back.
I think it's a mark both of what Leeds are as a club, but also of Berardi's kind of persistence in making himself valuable at Leeds, which he 100% did, and I felt left with massive credit behind him, that people liked the kind of lunatic side of him, and that he was able to be a liability, but at the same time people still wanted him around. You kind of felt that from time to time it was always coming with Berardi, and there were always going to be those moments, and if he stuck around long enough he was going to break the record for red cards at Leeds. And yet, despite the sort of liability moments, people do still look back on that as a really good signing, and actually look back at him as a pretty important part of the Bielsa era, without being front and centre of it. The part that he played in it, particularly, playing on in the period where he did his knee injury. Yeah, it put money in the bank.
Another red card on the debut, one which I'd forgotten until I saw the page from LUFC data. Olivier Dacour, 1860 Munich in the Champions League qualifier back then, sent off on his debut at Ellen Road.
It does happen. We're picking up all the really positive ones here, aren't we?
Well, let's. I'll tell you what. Let me tell you about the one that I found that kind of quietly blew my mind, because it's obviously well before our lifetimes. But going back to the first set of debuts after World War II, so you're talking January 1946, 7 debutants in a 4-4 draw versus Middlesbrough in the FA Cup on the 5th of January 46, and then the replay happened 4 days later. Scoreline up at Ayresome Park, we lost 7-2 with another debutant in the lineup. But
in that period, you would have gone for years without any mid-war football. It would have been post-war. Everybody's suddenly trying to get teams back together. People who hadn't played football for years starting to play again. You can imagine it being wild and wonderful. Actually,
I mean, goals is where it's at on your debut, isn't it? And I think back to one that I remember being at just sort of vaguely now, April 1989, Carl Schutt, debut hat-trick against Bournemouth in a 3-0 win. He got all 3. Not a bad start, that, is it?
I remember Hulse as well on his debut. I think he got 2 goals. Sure, it was at home to either Norwich or Reading.
Was it Reading?
Was it Reading?
3-1
yeah,
win, yeah,
and we had a big back page on the Evening Post. Incredible Hulse. Had his shirt off, tensing his muscles. And we went up to interview him the following week, and he was really embarrassed about that, because our photographer Steve Ryden walked in and he said to him, "All right, Rob," he said, "I don't recognise you without your shirt."
It's a good job. Frank Strandley, do you remember his, well, you might not, but his debut against Middlesbrough in 1993, one that I was at.
Next big thing.
Yeah, well, literally. It was a big lad, was Frank, wasn't he? He was only like 20 or something when he made his debut. He came off the bench, but he was, because we didn't have as much worldwide media at that time, he came with something of a reputation. I mean, with the greatest respect in the world, he's not Erling Haaland's level of reputation, but there was a bit of excitement around him coming in, and he came up and he's a big lad.
They can be quite misleading, can debuts, can't they? I thought back to Luke Murphy's when he scored. We just paid £1 million for someone for the first time in years, and Bates was out of the building, and it was a new start, and then he was there scoring in the last minute against Brighton, opening day, nice and sunny, and you start thinking, maybe this is going to work. Maybe he's the missing part of the jigsaw, and then within about 6 weeks. Yeah, it's not really working out.
Yeah, I mean, Alan Smith's was a cracking debut, but I didn't want to write about that one because you descend down that rabbit hole and you never get out of it. I mean, you've listed here probably I wouldn't say the worst debuts you've ever seen for individual players, although they were not great, but surely the worst day ever for a club debut, which was the 6-0 at Wednesday when Kebby and Stewart started in that 4-3-3. I mean, I'm trying to imagine the mental impact of signing on the Thursday, being picked in the starting lineup on the Saturday, losing 6-0 and getting torn to shreds by a packed away end who did stick around to make sure that everybody knew what they thought of it. I'm thinking, probably wasn't a great decision.
It had got desperate by that time, hadn't it, as well? So there was so much hope piled onto even loan signings. Like, it's a completely different mindset to the one that we're in now in the Premier League. But it was just like, please just sign somebody. Oh, thank God we've signed somebody. They'll save us. Well, at least it's something to cling on to. It's something new.
That was basically the point at which McDermott was trying to say to people, if you cling into signing, a signing for signing's sake, any signing to make the difference, then there's a high likelihood that you might be disappointed. That's when it's all that's when it's always crucial to get the right players rather than just any players. Although, as it turned out, Kebby and Stewart seemed to be completely the wrong players, and were very much the wrong players in that system. But yeah, I mean, that as your first day goes, it doesn't get more dismal than that, I don't think.
No, I mean, of the ones that I've noted down prior to that in the list, we've got sandwiched in between that and the Rob Hulse 2 debut goals. We've got Alex Cairns with, wow, I mean, talk about being thrown into difficult circumstances. When he came off the bench for Rachubka in the 5-0 against Blackpool, when Ellen Road, it had gone beyond toxic and poisonous into gallows humour at that point.
Although arguably quite easy in some ways.
Yeah,
you've not got a lot of pressure on. Like, all you have to do is not let every single shot into the net, and you've kind of made an improvement.
Yeah, I've spoken to Cairns about this, and he said the thing was everybody had gone at Rachubka in such a big way that you could almost have rolled a wheelie bin onto the pitch, and people would have said, "Well, it's worth a bash." You know, so he kind of felt like it was a free hit for him. I don't think he fancied it. You know, I think he thought to himself, what a game this is. Because obviously Tom Lees had been sent off by that point, the 3-0 down, so they were quite clearly going to get a hiding, and there was quite a high likelihood that they were going to concede goals in the second half. I think what Cairns knew was that he was not going to be blamed on the night. Even if Blackpool had scored 20 times in 45 minutes, people would have said, yeah, but it had all gone wrong by that point. But he talks about, the point where he was sent to warm up on the touchline midway through the first half, and there was that massive cheer, and he said for Rachubka he just felt absolutely awful, because he thought, like he said, any goalkeeper that had been sent to warm up in those circumstances would have got a huge cheer from the crowd, because they just abandoned Rachubka in such a big way.
On a similar tip to what we're talking about, Stewart and Kebe there carrying like the weight of expectation, Robbie Rogers is a perfect example of that. If you think back to when he came on against Doncaster, he came on, it was about 20 minutes to go, and he lasted 10 minutes before he got that head injury.
He seemed to get horrendous injuries, or quite bad injuries every time he played. He seemed to always be in the wrong place at the wrong time to take, a head in the face or whatever else. And I mean, I think it was Stevenage that he ended up before long, and there'd been he'd come from America, quite a lot of hype around him.
Why? That's what I can't quite get to the bottom of. I'm not sure what it was that we were looking for.
When I look back, I'm not sure either, and I wonder if it was symptomatic of the fact that Leeds recruitment in that period had gone really weird. I mean, we spoke about Rachubka there. Rachubka was, I think, the first signing of the summer after Leeds had just missed out on the playoffs under Grayson, when they'd been in second place at Christmas in the Championship, and then had finished 7th. And when it came to a window that demonstrated a club that were moving forward and were trying to make progress, that wasn't it. And the players they were signing, it was kind of last minute deal for Dan O'Day, who didn't have a great time here. So you were kind of hoping that anybody they went for might just turn out to be decent. And if truth be told, because back then you didn't have much in the way of Y-Scout or real access to proper information about Rodgers other than what people could tell you over the phone or by email, you didn't really know anything about him. So he came over and you thought, well, this guy could be good, I suppose. But he just seemed to be injury prone in a way that I don't think was his fault at all. As I say, that horrific injury to start with, which was a really, really nasty one, was pretty much the end of him. He never got going after that.
Just going back to happier times, and near the decor one, I've written down 2 in particular that have stood out to me. One of which is Tony Hackworth and Danny Hay being given debuts in a 4-0 roasting in the Nou Camp. And I remember seeing that game kick off, because it was the first one in the groups proper, wasn't it? That Barcelona one. We were a little bit threadbare at that time, thinking, oh wow, this is the Champions League. It felt like we were, I don't know, almost like a promoted team coming up into the Premier League that's just absolutely, terrible, versus the standard there and getting absolutely rinsed out, a little bit like we did on the opening day of this season. But let's move on from that.
Maybe that was why Gary Kelly took all the Irish lads into that chapel at the Nou Camp to pray beforehand.
But just,
didn't work.
What a baptism of fire, that one. I mean, imagine, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the players who were both peripheral characters at Leeds, even at that time, and went on to be peripheral characters. But to be gone, right, lads, just to let you know, you're starting.
Yeah.
A bit like Mackay and Whitehouse at Sutton, I'm sure. That was very similar to them.
Exactly the same.
Being completely out of the depth.
Are we allowed to discuss that, or should we just move on from how and why that happened.
Of course we are. I mean, how the Mackay twins ever turned up at Leeds was a kind of mystery in itself, because it wasn't that they weren't academy players. They clearly were. But the feeling at Leeds when they arrived was that they weren't really any better than what was already there. So nobody.
Who was the manager when they arrived?
Do you mean at the club?
Yes.
I think it was Steve Evans.
Right.
But in terms of the academy, I think it was Paul Hart who was running it. Hart left not a whole lot longer after that, but and it wasn't his decision. It wasn't Hart's decision to sign them at all. But there was this feeling of these two guys have turned up and they're not better than the players we've got already. Why are they here? When it came to, and then obviously Whitehouse arrived as well. These guys had been around Doncaster while the Mackay's dad Willie was down there.
Willie Mackay, the
agent who'd been doing work for Doncaster. When it came to Sutton, I mean, he never said this, but it seemed to me that Monk played them at Sutton as a way of saying to Radrizzani, and Cellino was still there at the time as well, and the board, sign me some players. I want players. He at that point, he was still looking for other people to come in, and you'll remember that in the next couple of days, or certainly before the deadline, they got Mo Barrow and they got Alfonso Pedraza from Spain as well. And we asked Monk after the game, what about signings? And he just said something like, you need to ask the club, which was a definite dig. And, it was a definite case of, well, nothing's happened. I don't know. Ask them why we haven't got any more players. And I did feel with that lineup that it was a definite case of, look, this is the depth of my resources. I need more to get us over the line. So sign somebody, which they did.
The Mackays did get a move to Neil Warnock's Cardiff City off the back of merit. So that's good for them.
Yeah.
But you knew that there was no chance really that you were ever going to see the Mackays or Whitehouse in a Leeds United team again. I think Whitehouse is or was playing a long way down the pyramid now, and I honestly don't know where the two Mackay twins are.
Paul Mackay's in Scotland. It's even worse for him.
Is he at Airdrie or somewhere like that?
He was at Airdrie last year. He's at Queen of the South now.
Oh, the mighty Queen of the South. Yeah. I think his brother went to Airdrie for a little while as well. But it was just a weird situation. But that game did feel like a manager sending a message to the board. That was classic.
What an awful day.
Oh, it was horrendous. Got a speeding ticket on the way down as well.
Philip.
I know.
Yeah. I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed. Just returning back to the Champions League era, by the way, the second one that I had on the list was Don Matteo. Made his Leeds debut against AC Milan in the Champions League game at home that Bowyer scored, and it was 1-0 in the rain.
Yeah, you always think about the other one with Matteo, don't you? The other AC Milan game. But yeah, no, I mean, cracking night that was.
I mean, it was him and Dubry at the back, wasn't it, against Shevchenko? Like, we're talking prime Shevchenko at this point.
I think the defence was all over the place that night. I don't mean it was a mess. I mean that in terms of the players who were in it, it was nothing like O'Leary's strongest back four, not even close. And I read an interview by Dubry a while back where he was saying, you had Bierhoff up front for AC Milan, and everybody looked at the team sheet, not the players, but people outside looked at the team sheet and thought Leeds are going to get absolutely annihilated.
It was Bierhoff and Shevchenko. He had forgotten the other one. Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, everybody thought we are going to get annihilated here, and then turns out Dida can't catch, and jobs are good.
In more recent times, I'd forgotten this, and again, credit to LUFC Data for reminding me. Robin Koch's debut last season, a baptism of fire because it was at Anfield and the reigning champions of the Premier League gave away a penalty, unjustly, I would like to add, inside 5 minutes.
Yeah, I don't think we'll look back at that as a kind of Berardi, Bruce Lee comparison, really. Well, he was really unlucky, and that was one of the incidents that meant that VAR rules changed again. It shouldn't have been a penalty, that. Unlike the one against Fulham, which definitely was a penalty.
Another debut hat-trick, Samuel Saiz, Port Vale.
Yeah, I remember that night because somebody was badgering me, telling me that Saiz had to get a 10 out of 10 in the ratings, and I was saying to them, trouble is, if you get a 10 out of 10 for a hat-trick against Port Vale, what are we going to do on the day that Saiz scores a hat-trick in the game that wins promotion from the Championship? You don't leave yourself anywhere.
No, but surely you mark it on the merits of the game itself. No,
no. With very few exceptions, nobody ever gets a 10 out of 10, and they absolutely do not get a 10 out of 10 for a hat trick. Great hat trick that it was. Hat trick against Port Vale in the League Cup.
It must be
not going to happen.
It's a Scotsman thing because you didn't want to print two digits. You're saving on ink.
The paper would have changed it if I'd sent it in 10 out of 10. They'd have gone no.
What? Surely you can have a 10 out of 10 in a League Cup game.
There's a reporter called Chris Bascombe who used to work for Liverpool Echo, and I think is still with the Telegraph. And if you search hard enough, you'll probably find it on Twitter. But he once did a breakdown of how you score who, depending on how the game's gone. And he said, and pretty much everybody will back him up on this, 10 out of 10s just never happen, with the rarest of exceptions. So the Evening Post gave one to Nigel Martin, I think, for his performance against Roma in the UEFA Cup.
Mm-hmm.
He gave Ferdinand a 10 out of 10 for his performance against Deportivo.
Yeah.
I gave McCormack a 10 out of 10 for those 4 goals down at Charlton because the finishing was ridiculously good, and I did think, do you know what, as a display of finishing, I don't think you'll see an awful lot better than that. But even that was pretty borderline because it was Charlton, it was the Championship. You know, it was kind of difficult to decide. But I stand by that. Hat-trick in the League Cup against Port Vale, no.
Do you remember what you gave Rahubka for that game?
He must have got a 0. He must have done. I mean, I can't remember. Somebody, Rich Byron, one of the subs at the Evening Post, once tweeted, it was the Sunday night before all the copy ran after the Hillsborough game, you know, the 6-0 defeat down there, and he just ran the numbers, the score, the ratings from front to back, and it was 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 1, 0, 2. I think poor old
sound like a touring a roadie doing a mic check.
Yeah,
1, 2, 1, 2.
Poor old Matt Smith was just about creeping into the negative figures there.
I've dug up a couple of other debut hat tricks apart from Carl Schott and Samuel Saiz. We had Don Weston in 1962 debut hat trick versus Stoke.
Yeah, it was a crack on that
when we won 3-1. Did you enjoy that?
Yeah.
And there were 2 more in the 1920s as well, which I don't think anyone would have been alive to see those, given where we are now. But I'm sure they were good.
Well, do get in touch if you did. We'll get you on the show.
I'm sure we've got avid podcast listeners in the approaching 100-year-old. Well, it would have to be about 110 at least, wouldn't they?
So. Yeah, I think so.
Never mind.
I struggle to remember games that happened last season. People will be like, did we win that one? I don't know. So yeah, maybe probably, but best left as a stat, I think, that one.
I know we finished that section, but we were talking there just in the break, weren't we, about other memorable debuts, and there were some others that we did dig up, like Jonathan Woodgate for Real Madrid, like a year in the making when he got an own goal and a red card on his debut. Remember Ali Dia for Southampton, who came in pretending to be George Weah's cousin, wasn't, got subbed off again as a sub. Jermaine Pennant got a debut hat-trick for Arsenal, never scored again, but the one that stood out that made us laugh just then was Jason Crowe, former Leeds United right back, but he made his debut for Arsenal. I don't think he ever played for Arsenal again. It was in a League Cup game against Birmingham City, and he was sent off by Uriah Rennie, always a favourite referee at Leeds United, after 33 seconds, which I think is still a record.
I mean, even Matt Smith didn't manage that, did he? At Hillsborough, I think he was on for...
Well,
he must have been on 2 minutes or something by that point.
They gave him the benefit of the doubt on Twitter by using the Gone in 60 Seconds poster for him after that, him and McDermott on it, both of them looking thoroughly confused and bewildered. But yeah, I think with Smith it was somewhere in the region of 50 to 60 seconds. I'd have to look back.
Jason Crowe, mainly memorable for my mate Gat, who used to accompany his every touch with, along with arm gestures quite often, with
I mean, that's good for the cameras as well, because you can watch this on the Athletics YouTube channel now, and you'll see Michael's demonstrating of a crow.
It's a good job Crowe didn't play like 200 times for the club. He'd have been getting filled in towards the end of that.
Anyway, we digress. Let's move on to Liverpool, and Bielsa's presser is coming on Friday. We're recording ahead of that, so we don't have his comments for this week, but do we know where we sit, first of all, with the Brazilians? That's the big question, because Rafinha didn't travel. It's going to affect Firmino, Fabinho and Alisson for Liverpool. Will they just say, to hell with it, and play all of them?
I think between the period of us recording this and the podcast being released, we'll get further developments with it. It's in the hands of the Premier League at the moment. They are kind of leading this and are leading the fight against the attempt by the Brazilian FA to get FIFA to impose these bans. It was always a risk, and the clubs knew that it was a risk. Premier League knew that it was a risk because they were effectively refusing to release players who'd been called up. The players were refusing to travel. the complication for the Premier League is that this was a blanket decision across the whole of the division. It's not as if these clubs have taken the decision not to send players like Rafinha individually. You'll remember the Premier League issuing a statement saying that players who are due to travel to red list countries will not be released. La Liga did something similar. It hasn't quite held. I mean, clearly some players have gone to other countries, and it's, as usual, developed into a massive mess. But I think the problem for the Premier League is going to be that, having issued that blanket statement, they can't really then have a situation or allow a situation where actually, on the basis of that decision, clubs are compromised because of it, but only a small handful of clubs. If this was going to affect all 20 sides in the league, then perhaps you could stand back and say, well, this is not an ideal situation and we need to work this out. And if we're going to get hit with sanctions by FIFA, then we need to take them. Because it is only going to be a couple who lose, or 4 or 5 who lose players, the Premier League are fighting hard on this and will try to resist the punishment. From speaking to Leeds, they're fairly relaxed about it, and Rafinha has continued training this week. But they do need to know, because come Thursday, Friday time, Bielsa's going to want to decide on his team, and is going to want to make sure he knows what his 11's going to be, and he'll want to know whether Rafinha's going to be in the side or is going to be out of the picture. I don't know how this is going to work itself out. I don't know what the Premier League will do. I don't know what they can do if FIFA insist on imposing these bans. I don't know if there's any way of disregarding it or challenging it or delaying it. So watch this space, and it might well be, as I say, by the time you listen to this, that actually it's solved itself one way or the other. It's
a bit messy, is what we're saying.
Yeah, and a huge surprise, really, isn't it? I mean, I think the biggest issue for the Brazilian FA is probably not so much this international break, but the fact that we've got 2 others coming up very quickly. And I don't think there's much chance at all that a country like Brazil, on the red list now, will not be on the red list when we break up again in October and break up again in November. And they will be concerned about the fact that they might be looking at the absence of really key players for quite a long stretch because of this. I think if there were government exemptions, it would make all the difference. But the problem is that I guess football can't necessarily expect to be treated as a special case. There are other things to focus on. As I said earlier in the podcast, nobody seems to be compromising on any front with this. Everybody wants exactly what they want, but obviously things don't fit together because of the difficulty with travelling and the difficulty with quarantining and testing and everything else. So it is a mess, and it was always going to be a mess, and I suspect that this will come around, unless there are some big decisions taken. I suspect this will come around again in October and November.
Aren't Brazil shooting themselves in the foot a bit here? Because surely they're just annoying their own players here and making it more likely that players themselves will withdraw from squads in future.
I think, again, if they're thinking about their own interests, they need to be seen to do something with this. Otherwise, you as I say, you reach an impasse where your best players, or some of your best players, are unusable. You can't ever get them. I mean, it might well be, if the red list, if Brazil stays on the red list for any length of time, that it's months before they would be able to answer a call-up. And clearly for any country that's trying to qualify for World Cups or whatever else, that's a big problem. So it will upset a lot of people. I think inevitably on the back end of this, there will be somebody somewhere who's very unhappy about what the outcome is. But it surprises me. Well, does it surprise me? You would have thought that FIFA might have been a little bit more prepared for this happening, and what they were going to do and what their kind of directives were going to be if you found yourself in a situation where essentially clubs were refusing to send players because of the quarantine implications. But the directive from the Premier League was very clear that in their view, Premier League clubs were entitled to do this, and that's certainly the point that Leeds and others have been making in the past few days.
And the truth is, with Brazil's World Cup qualification, they're pretty much there already because of the format of qualifying in South America. They've played 7 and won 7, but it's just on one big league table, and they will be in one of the qualifying spots. So
it's top 4, isn't it? Yeah.
They kind of don't even need this. They're doing it to make a point.
I think that's true. I think it's the principle of it, and they'll probably be looking further down the line about, you know, how long is this going to be an issue and how long is it going to be a handicap for them.
It's a good old-fashioned power struggle, isn't it? And
Very much so.
Premier League and FIFA and the Brazilian FA. What we do know from the Premier League front is the product is everything with the Premier League. So they're going to want their big stars on the telly at the weekend, and it'll be interesting to see how much they can exert influence over either FIFA or the Brazilian FA or whatever it might be.
There's partly that, but there's also the question of what happens next if bans are imposed, because if players do have to quarantine when they come home, and it wasn't helped in this international break by the number of games that that FIFA have allowed. I mean, it seemed to me that if Rafinha had travelled and had been involved in all of Brazil's games, he might well have missed the Liverpool game anyway because of the way it's been scheduled, which isn't helpful. But if come October the Premier League say again, you don't have to release your players who go to red list countries. Well, if Rafinha has served a ban on the back of this decision, what value is that to what value does that statement offer to Leeds? It's none at all. Leeds are just going to say to the Premier League, it's fine you giving us this directive, but if at the end of it you can't actually enforce this and you can't protect us from any sanctions from FIFA, then you may as well not bother. So there's a huge amount to sort out. But it does sound as if the Premier League have actively taken the lead with this. I think they realise that it's for them to try and sort this out rather than individual clubs fighting themselves.
Do you think if he misses out, we will see Dan James?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I think we'll ask Bielsa this tomorrow, and it will depend what's happened in the meantime. And I will be pretty interested to see what he makes of the whole Rafinha Brazil mess, because it's not ideal and it's not great for him. And it's important to say actually that Liverpool, like you said, I think the chance that Firmino will be injured and won't play anyway, but Liverpool do have this issue as well. They have Brazilian players like Alisson who would be hit with the same sanctions, so it's not as if Leeds are alone here. Will Dan James start? I mean, we'd all start him if Rafinha wasn't available, wouldn't we? You'd just throw him straight onto the right wing. I guess the one of the reasons why he might is that there's not necessarily another particularly obvious candidate to go there now that Costa is gone. You know, I'm not sure who else would be more suitable for it. But you've seen over the years how Bielsa is when it comes to integrating new signings. He might take his time.
Tyler Roberts, wide right, and a Twitter meltdown within a few minutes.
But that's not... I mean, I don't think it will be Tyler Roberts wide right. It could be, but I suspect not. But that is the sort of thing that he might do. You know, we've seen it loads
He might
of times.
go for Rodrigo, because Rodrigo's played out wide like as an inside forward, hasn't he, before? You never know. So Roberts might end up sitting in at number 10. And I mean, is that too attacking? I don't know.
I don't think Rodrigo has played much as much wide right in a 4. And even the sort of talk about him being massively versatile at Valencia, when you look at where he did play, it's predominantly as a 9, you know, as a centre forward. So it could be done. It definitely could be done.
Bamford,
I think I've always loved this about Bielsa, that you look at the squad and say, well, there's a massive hole on the right wing, and it's Dan James sized. You know, easy decision. Rafinha out, Dan James in, and then the decision that gets
Somerville.
taken
It's Somerville, isn't it?
Kind of weird and wonderful, but pretty often works. You know, quite often works. He takes this decision that has everybody sitting going, you can't be serious. But then it just happens, and that is because he coaches players and he has a system and a style that people understand. So they are all pretty interchangeable.
Serious question.
Yeah.
Somerville. I mean, I was joking about it there, but then the more I think about it, it's possible, isn't it?
Could be. Yeah. No, I mean, of the wingers who are behind the established first team crop, and even while Costa was there, Somerville was the closest. Paveda's gone to Blackburn, so it definitely isn't going to be him. Somerville is the one, and we mentioned this year, the one that Bielsa has noticed, not just because of his ability, but because of the way the other players are dealing with him and acting around him. They clearly think that he's got something about him. So yeah, again, it would be classic Bielsa, really, that your £25 million signing is on the bench and you give a debut to your young Dutchman.
It'll probably happen now, won't it? What do you expect from Sunday's game then? I, spoiler alert from last week, did predict on the Square Ball podcast that Leeds would sneak this. I've got a feeling there's just one of these in the pipeline. An unexpected victory, 1-0. Michael, not so confident?
I just don't think... I think they've probably got too much for us. And we are... Potentially, we still don't know what the team's going to be doing. So we're maybe without our left-back. We might be without Dallas, who is our backup left-back, which means he's also out of midfield.
Somerville at left-back.
We don't know about what... We don't know if Click is going to play yet. For me, there are quite a lot of unknowns, and we don't have necessarily the squad depth to deal with it at this stage.
Yeah, there's a heck of a lot to ask when it comes to just individual players and fitness and availability and everything else. But I think it'll be fairly clear after Bielsa's press conference what the team's going to look like. And obviously the Rafinha decision will influence that massively. Liverpool seem a bit more sparky to me this season. It felt as if the steam went out of them a bit after the title win, and there wasn't quite the same sort of buoyancy that you'd had under Klopp. You know, that kind of constant smashing the door down in the way that they did. They were just totally relentless in the year that they won the title. It wasn't like that last season. I think they're probably starting to get back up to speed now. I don't think they're going to trouble City or Chelsea for the title this year, but I think it'll definitely be top four. And I said this before the season started. I think the best of the teams in the Premier League are going to be much harder work for the other teams in it than they were last season. I think they will all be stronger.
I lean on chaos theory for my prediction of a Leeds win. I'm fully aware that I'm probably very, very wrong.
You're going to have to predict a Leeds defeat at some stage this season.
Why?
Just to be right.
I'm not bothered about being right. I'm bothered about being happy.
You're like one of those. You're like one of the kids that wheel out onto the pitch at before the game, who's the mascot or whatever, and they say, "What do you think the score will be?" And they go, 5-0 Leeds, and they go, "Oh well, okay."
I think, to be honest, though, a draw would be a good result on Sunday. Just given everything, given the amount of variables that we've identified there, that I really hadn't factored in when I added up my.
Do you remember the kid on the pitch about? Must have been pre-Bielsa. Had to be pre-Bielsa, and I can't remember exactly when it was that the stadium announcer said to him, "So you backing a Leeds win today?" And he just said, "Probably not." I think he was right as well. I could see a point in this for Leeds. I think it could be very similar to the game at Elland Road last season. I think a win might be a stretch. Tough game, this one.
You think so? I mean, will the crowd have any influence?
Yeah,
it's going to be noisy in there. Liverpool won't be used to that.
I thought the crowd were good against Everton, and I thought that the players coped well with the crowd against Everton, even in that period where you just wondered if Everton were going to stretch away, make it 3-1 and tie the game up. It should make a difference. I think, if we're being totally honest, the kind of the pressure game out of the two coming up is definitely Newcastle. I mean, if they can get something from Liverpool, great, but I think Newcastle, a little bit like Burnley away, is the one where you expect them to really assert some authority.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that one properly next week when we preview. I think we're recording on Wednesday next week, so it may be out a little early because we've got the silly Friday night game, haven't we, which you're going to, Michael?
I am indeed, yeah, looking forward to that.
Should be good, and we'll probably see the lilac third kit there. Do you like it?
I don't care, really.
We have this conversation around every kit now, don't we?
Do always. Something you ask me, and I always say I'm too old. I'm too old and too fat. I sort of leave this to beautiful people who fit into them nicely and are big on kits. What's the colour? What's the official colour?
Rhapsody purple.
Disruptive purple or something. I don't know. Yeah.
Rhapsody purple.
Sexy purple. I don't know. Yeah, Rhapsody purple. I think is the official Adidas silly palette colour.
Robin Koch looks nice in it.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, no, but Robin Koch is the sort of person who would look nice in a football kit.
Yeah, he's tall. He's tall and thin, and yeah.
I'm not. But I did note the fact that within about 12 hours of James signing and the transfer window closing, somebody on Twitter was asking me about the third kit.
Well, no, there you go.
Which just proves
You've got it now.
That the circle of life continues to go round.
It does. It was pointed out on Twitter that it's reminiscent of a dental technician's outfit, that sort of colour purple with the white accents. So once you see that, you'll never unsee it. But I quite like it, actually. I know it's not very Leeds, but I think it's all right. It's fine.
It's fine.
No problem
it's
with
fine,
it.
isn't it? It's.
I'm not going to be buying it, so it's fine.
It's different. You probably will, though. You've said this before. I'm not buying the kit, and then
I bought the
your entire family become full kit wankers in no time.
Well, I've got my son is 10 years old, so he's fine.
That's legit.
He's got room for that. But the only shirt I've bought in 20 years is the grey and pink when we got promoted. But I got it in the sale at the very end. When it was
quite right as well. Yeah.
When it was being sold off. But which do you think's the strongest of the three kits?
I quite like the new one.
The purple one.
Yeah, why not? I think the away kit's probably the nicest, but I actually quite like this for something a bit different, I've got to say.
Yeah, I must say I don't mind it either. Probably the away kit for me.
And let's wrap it up then on score predictions, just to return to Liverpool briefly, because I realise we haven't done that. I'm saying 1-0 lead. Joss, what did you say, Michael? I can't remember.
I'm not sure I did. 3-1 Liverpool.
What?
I know, I'm sorry.
I'm going to go 1-1.
Okay, fine. We'll go for that. Well, we'll wrap it up there then for this week. 33% off at The Athletic if you go to theathletic.com/Leeds pod. The good thing is, no matter what happens this weekend, we'll be going into next week looking ahead to Newcastle, who are really, really, really unhappy at the minute. That is not a happy club at all.
I don't mean it's a pointless club, as in there's no point in them actually existing, but they don't seem to exist for anything at the moment. They're just kind of floating and going nowhere. I think they'll probably just about stay up again, but it's not much of a sales pitch at the start of the season. Here's to just about staying up again. They're so at odds with Bruce, they're so at odds with Ashley. They've done
and the Premier League itself as well now.
Yeah, there is that, which has caused a lot of unrest. They haven't done much in the market. I know they signed Willock, but that seems to me like £25 million on a player who isn't going to make enough of a difference on his own to be a good investment at £25 million. That to me
feels a little bit like throw them a bone.
Yeah, I think, and potentially Bruce as well, because they had him last season on loan, and potentially to say to Bruce, look, I've got you this player, but that player alone isn't enough. It's going to be a tough season up there.
So a defeat at St James's Park. Right, we'll return next week at the Phil Hayes Show on Twitter. If you want to say hi, we'll catch you then.